All right, so thanks very much for the introduction, Greg, and thank you for the opportunity to talk with your audience today. So my name's Fiona. I'm from the Centre for Agricultural Economics and Development at the University of Western Australia. Our centre is research-based, and our expertise is mostly in understanding farmer behaviour with the aim to support practice change and new technology adoption. And we also have expertise and projects in the efficiency of agricultural supply chains. So sort of looking at a bit of both things here around understanding what this presentation is looking at management change and those different options for producers, and also an economic evaluation around sort of efficiency or performance of different supply chains. And it's very much case study based, using real data from real businesses. So just to bear that in mind. And I guess with that, there are some sensitivities with the information that's presented. So which is why I've chosen to present certain things. So the work that I'll be presenting is part of the Beef Links program, which has been running for several years now, and our project was one part of this larger program. So it's funded by UWA and MLA donor company. It's a large program with multiple partners, and by that I mean industry groups and producer groups, as well as MLA and UWA, and also researchers. And it's predominantly focused on rangeland cattle, with the idea to answer these three, or to address these 3 points, which is a better understanding of the critical control points across the supply chain, identifying best practice and practical strategies for the management and movement of cattle from north to south. And the program has also used, say, demonstrations, training opportunities and engagement with people, including producers and industry across the WA supply chain. So the key researchers that are involved in our project are Phil Verco, who's the program leader, Faye Roller-Rutan, Asjad Sheikh, Montana Walsh-Baddeley and Tammy Harold, and we're all based at University of Western Australia. Right, just for a bit of context, I just thought it would be useful to put up a graphic here on cattle disposals in Australia. So this is data that was compiled by DPIRD using the ABS information for 2023. So what you can see here is Australia produces around 8 million head of cattle. This was in 2023. The bulk far majority of those go to domestic slaughter, and then about 8% go via live export. Most of the domestic slaughter goes export, so about 3/4, and then 1/4 is for domestic consumption. With the live export, 3/4 is exported out of the northern ports, which are across WA, Northern Territory and Queensland, and about 1/4 through the southern ports. So when you move down all across, I guess, to WA, so using the same data set for WA, the story is a bit different. So WA is quite a small supply, producer of cattle compared to the rest, to other states in Australia. And what we're seeing here is quite a distinct difference between the split between domestic slaughter and live export. So around nearly a third of cattle that are produced in WA are going live export, about 43% out of the northern ports, and nearly 60% out of the southern ports. Of the domestic slaughter, it's about half that goes for domestic consumption and half that goes for export. There are some gaps in this data set. So particularly with cattle movements east, so from WA to the Northern Territory and then across to Queensland, which we know is happening, but still, yeah, just trying to drill down onto settling on a number that are moving that way. And there's gaps in the north to south movement of cattle into the abattoirs. A bit unsure about that, and also in how many cattle are going into the feedlots, specifically from those northern areas down into the feedlots, which I think can be, some of that information can be sourced from the Australian lot feeders. So just to paint a bit of a picture of the context in which this research has been conducted, and some of the market decision making that that cattle producers in WA are doing. So a big part of the Beef Links program is to look at alternative options for getting cattle up to spec, to market spec more often, and backgrounding is one of those options. So for those that are unfamiliar with backgrounding, it's the definition of grouping and acclimatisation of animals before entry into a feedlot or an intensive finishing system. And for northern cattle in Western Australia, it's quite a convenient stop off, I guess, on their way to those southern markets. So southern markets in WA, or the markets in WA which are in the south, are generally the feedlots and the abattoirs, and also live export. Whereas the northern markets are more so live export and very few, if any, feedlots and abattoirs. So some of the benefit really of using backgrounding is for improved nutrition of the animal from having access to those high quality green feeds, such as annual pastures and say perennial grasses. They also have closer access to markets, so meaning there's shorter transport to those southern markets, which and also may give you more flexibility with your selling options. So knowing all of that, a key question for our team was, well, that's great, but does this option actually return value for money? Because there's costs involved in doing it, there's some potential risks. Is it a good use of your dollar? A second management practice that we looked at in the project was preparing cattle for transport to try and reduce shrinkage, which is weight loss that can occur during transport. So when you're transporting cattle to various points within the supply chain, there's been anecdotal and scientific studies that have shown that cattle lose weight throughout that process. And this is mostly caused by animal stress, which, and that can also, whilst that can impact on their weight loss, it can also affect the quality of the meat at the processor. And I think that's quite well established. But I guess what's not so well established is what's the range of shrinkage? What's the percentage? It does seem to vary a fair bit. So in the scientific literature, we found somewhere between 8 to 13 reports of 8 to 13%. Not a lot of studies done in Western Australia, a lot done in, say, the Canadian and American markets. And so, but also anecdotal information or reports from producers that we've spoken to as part of the project that suggests that that percentage could be a lot less than that, or it could be more. We looked at a variety, and there are a variety of practices that can be used to reduce animal stress and potentially therefore shrinkage. Some of those I've listed there that we looked at we included in the project were pressure release stock handling, feeding the animals feeding and watering animals pre and post transport, and also those pre and post health checks to make sure that they're meeting their nutritional needs. So that's great. There's things that you can do to reduce animal stress, to improve the condition of your animals by the time they reach markets. But does this return value for money? Is this a worthwhile exercise to go through? Because it's time consuming. There's some element of learning involved in how to do some of these things, and there are certainly costs involved. So is it delivering the benefits that you need? So to answer some of these questions around value for money of these changes to management, or changes to the way these cattle systems are operating, we developed a whole farm budget spreadsheet tool in Microsoft Excel, and very conveniently we were able to give it an acronym of BEEF. So it's the Beef Economic Evaluation Framework. And it's an economic evaluation of farm enterprise and management that can be done, well, that is at accounting for costs and benefits and change at each stage in production. So right, from on the breeding property right through to the processor or the abattoir and sale at market. The tool includes enterprise information such as the station characteristics, like the area, the infrastructure that are in place, for example. They've got herd composition, breed, animal class, weights, number of cattle that are sold, mortality, shrinkage, and weaning rate. We also include the market price, and a neat thing with the model is that you can include the proportion of turnoff for each market. So you could run the analysis looking at a different percentage split between, say, supplying cattle to live export, a proportion to live export and another proportion to the abattoir, which we know is what many producers do. They don't, many producers don't just supply into one market, they spread their risk, they diversify across multiple markets. We've also got the fixed costs, such as infrastructure and, say, shire rates. And then we've got information on management, like how effective, is the management effective in achieving the change that you're looking for, and also those variable costs that are directly tied to management, such as additional feeding or additional labour or additional maintenance, for example. And you could also include other revenue streams if you wanted to. So because it's a spreadsheet-based tool, it can be used by people for their own businesses, and the analysis that we've done is from data that we've collected from real businesses that are operating in the rangelands and the southern agricultural area in WA. So as part of running these analyses, there's a very high level of engagement with the producers and experts. So we went out and talked to people, went through their businesses, pulled out the necessary numbers to be able to do these whole farm budget analysis. We also talked to experts around the structure of the model and making sure that that was all common sense. One of the the big pluses from this spreadsheet tool is it's essentially a benefit cost analysis, but it has the ability to integrate lots of diverse pieces of information into one framework. So we can include some, scientific information, for example, around feed and nutrition, but we can also incorporate management decision-making, or, the management context, and include costs of management and all of these other things that we know that producers use in their decision-making. So it has quite a strong focus on decision-making, which I feel is very important, because the economics is only really one part. Like, there's lots of other things that come into play. It's also transparent in the assumptions and their impact on outcomes because it's a spreadsheet tool. You can see exactly where all the numbers are. We're able to identify and deal with knowledge gaps and uncertainties. And we do that through sensitivity analysis, where we're able to, say, tease out the consequences that might occur from, say, variation in the data. So, and as I'll talk about later, for example, the prices that were used are 6 months old, and there's, prices have changed a lot over the last 6 months. So we're able to include that variation and see how changes in those data points impact on the outcomes. So today, whilst we can do the spreadsheet tool, because it includes fixed costs and various other aspects of the enterprise, you can do a whole budget, whole farm enterprise analysis, but also a partial budget analysis, and partial budget analyses are very much about looking at the changes to revenue and costs from implementing something new. So that might be going into a new market or implementing a new management practice, like, for example, the de-stressing practices that I talked about before. There's a bunch of metrics that are produced in the model, like net farm income, return on investment, and also benefit cost ratio. And today I'm going to present the benefit cost ratios because we're using real people's businesses and it's such a small industry. I just want to maintain that producer confidentiality, but also I personally favour benefit cost ratios as a measure of efficiency. It's really looking at what your expected benefits are per dollar spent, which I feel is quite from my perspective, is a nice way to look at how you allocate your resources within your business. You can also compare, different sort of sized management changes because you're on a level playing field. So the benefit cost ratio is the gross revenue divided by the total costs. And in this case, because we're doing a partial budget analysis, we're only interested in the variable costs. So that's the costs that change given what you're implementing. So that might be things like additional feed that you have to give for cattle preparation, or it might be additional labour. So those all sorts of things, other types of additional inputs. The gross revenue is the market receipts of the number of cattle that you sold by the dollars per kilo and by the number of kilos, and linked to cattle production. And what we'll see in the next few slides is the benefit cost ratios, which if they're greater than 1, that's a tick, that's benefits outweighing the costs. So the results that I'm going to go through in the next sort of few slides are for 2 case studies. The first one is looking at cattle moving from the southern rangelands through to the southern agricultural zone, and we're looking at benefit cost ratios from supplying direct from the station to various markets. The next one we'll be looking at having those cattle stop off at a backgrounding property before they head on to different markets. And the next one then is specifically on station to feedlot and then to other markets from there. Then the second case study is for the northern rangelands, where we're looking at the just looking at the station to 2 different markets for that one, and then I'll present some of the results from the de-stressing practices. So the first case study is based on a nearly 2,300 hectare block that's used for backgrounding. It's in the southern agricultural zone. So it's backgrounding of Droughtmaster, Brahman and Shorthorn, so a mix of those. We just analysed 1 mob of 120 yearling heifers and steers, which were sold annually. The yearling heifers were on average 250 kilos per head, and the steers at 350 kilos per head. They are fed on annual and perennial pastures at the backgrounding property, and at the station property fed on native vegetation. So at the backgrounding property, the annual daily growth rate was about 0.3 kilos per day in the summer, and that gets up to 0.9 kilos per day in the winter. So looking at the sending these cattle directly from the station in the southern rangelands to various markets. So there's sort of between 250 and 350 kilo live weight. I've listed the prices there, which are probably a lot higher than what they are at the moment, or what they have been over the last 6 months. So just to bear that in mind. So if you sold your cattle under this scenario, using these numbers, if we're selling the cattle directly into the live export sale yard or the abattoir, these are the benefit cost ratios for each of those options. So as you can see, the live export and the abattoir options are greater than 1. So that's a positive outcome there. And selling directly into the sale yard, it's less than 1, although they're sort of pretty close, pretty line ball. But yeah, certainly if you're making it into the abattoir, well, at that price, into the abattoir is the better option there. Although, yeah, realistically, noting that that cattle of that weight might not meet the abattoir specs, but it's just to give you an idea, I guess, of the price range and what you could expect to see with these results around the efficiency there. So the next scenario is, so if the cattle going then via the backgrounding property in the southern agricultural zone, and just a nice little photo there of the team having a look at some perennial grasses at a backgrounding property. So the target weight is 100 kilos per head over 25 weeks. So it's shifting those state cattle station weights up to more the 450 kilo live weights. But also then there's with going via the backgrounding, there's those additional costs, and in these numbers are based on using an adjustment cost of $5 per head per week. There's also people that are doing more of a performance-based model, which we also did some analysis on, but I'm just going to present the adjustment costs for this one. And then there's also additional vet fees, and there's potentially some additional feeding that might be required during those 25 weeks. So additional costs, but obviously additional benefits in the extra weight. So in this case, it is shifting the benefit cost ratios all to above 1. And you would think that your prospects of getting into the abattoir would certainly be a lot better with the higher weight, and potentially also with the improved condition of the cattle from being on more nutritious feed for that period of time. The next one that we looked at was going past the feedlot. So here the target weight is 150 kilos a head in 100 days. So looking at getting steers up to between 500 to 600 kilos. So additional costs for this one. So this is consignment feeding. We've got those consignment feeding costs. Yeah, so not the BCR ratio is not as good, not as strong, I guess, as the previous slide for the backgrounding. And well, noting there that it wouldn't be a typical option to then put your cattle into the sale yard after you've been into the feedlot. But I guess we just left it in there as to demonstrate at that price, at the $3.27 price, at that, that BCR ratio is starting to dip below 1. So just moving on to the second case study. So this one was for the northern rangelands. So this is a nearly 580, well, just over 500,000 hectare property, which is used for breeding Brahman and Shorthorn, or Brahman crossed with Shorthorn. So the analysis here is the annual sale of the cattle. So they sell nearly 5,500 cattle annually across a range of different animal classes. The weight ranges that they are selling at is between 300 and 500 kilos, depending on the animal class. And the average daily gain that they're getting off this property is between 0.3 kilos a day in the dry season and 0.5 kilos a day in the wet season. So we looked at, for this case study, we did an analysis on the combination of markets that this business uses. So it's about 70% live export and 30% of cattle going to the abattoir. So for that 5,500 cattle that was sold annually, that's the split between the two markets. And so that's what these numbers are based on. So it was $1.38 for the live export market and $2.80 for the abattoir market. And this one worked out at a benefit cost ratio of greater than 1, which is this is also positive. And I will say that we cross-checked these numbers with the cattle producer, and they did match up really well with his own calculations that he had done on the business. So that was good. An interesting observation was that the pastoralists estimated that they're losing about 5% shrinkage during transport to these markets, and on a 400 kilo average weight, that's about nearly 60 kilos lost to shrinkage. So the second sort of practice that, or change in management then, that we're interested in was, if you implement some of these de-stressing practices, does that make a difference? Is it worthwhile doing that? So we did this for both of the case study properties. So we looked at, so for the de-stressing of cattle, we looked at costs around the handling and training of young cattle, which is mostly involved in the additional labour. And we also looked at additional water and hay costs for preparing cattle in the yards prior to going on the truck, and then preparing them for when they get off at the other end, to make sure that they're nice and happy and de-stressed and able to put on weight quicker when they get to the next stage in the supply chain, that there isn't that lag period in weight gain because of potentially because of the stress. And so we had included those costs in the analysis. We also included the effectiveness of doing these practices on and the impact of that on the benefits. So which was quite interesting in that we did a quick little survey of a couple of producers that are implementing these practices, and their assessment of how effective or how well they were doing these things was not always 100%. So just because you're implementing these de-stressing practices doesn't necessarily mean you're always getting 100% of the benefit, like the reported benefit from these practices, and that's important to include in the analysis. And I guess it also gives you an indication of, potentially where you could improve and what the value then of improving your cattle de-stressing will have on reducing the shrinkage. So for both of these case studies, it was around sort of 14 kilos per head, I think, saving for case study 1, and as I said before, nearly 60 kilos a head saving for case study 2 after transport. So that was the potential reduction in the shrinkage. But interestingly, it had very little difference on the benefit cost ratio. Yeah, so that was, anyway, so it's, it's not an overly profitable exercise, I guess, but importantly, we didn't account for any of the intangible benefits, specifically around animal welfare. And I just wanted to touch on that briefly. As part of our BeefLinks project, we did a survey of 1,000 WA beef consumers through an online recruitment process. And what we were interested in is asking them about what practices do you feel should be done for the WA beef industry to be considered humane and environmentally sustainable. And we took that mandate off from MLA. That's on their website about what we're aiming for as an industry. And so what we'd asked is, what we did was to find a set of animal welfare and environmental objectives that any producer could do in their business. And we asked the consumers to make choices. So which of these practices, and these were a range of things, of some of which were or are related to de-stressing animals, like particularly in the transport of animals. Some of them are around basic things around feed, making sure that your animals are well fed and watered or have access to water. There were things around health checks and so forth. And some of the environmental objectives were around like reducing land degradation and management during extreme events and things like that, stuff to do with water quality. So we asked consumers to make their choices about which practices they feel is most important and which are least important. And what was very clear in the results is that all of the animal welfare objectives that we included were preferred to the environmental objectives. So a really strong message from consumers around the importance of animal welfare. And so when we're thinking about implementing, say, de-stressing practices, whilst there might not be a compelling economic reason to do it, there is, I feel there is quite a compelling sort of market and sort of social license reason to do that. So yeah, I thought that was quite an important part of the benefit, which we didn't account for in the economic evaluation, but it is still an important consideration when thinking about potentially investing in some of these management practices. So in summary, from the results that we have, and from these specific case studies, it seems to show that using a finishing system is a worthwhile investment. The returns from backgrounding tended to outperform feedlotting, but noting we didn't account for some other benefits and costs, such as reducing feed pressure. And that's something that we would like to sort of drill into a bit more in sort of some future analysis using this tool. We also found that implementing the de-stressing practices didn't really change the benefit per dollar spent, but it does contribute to animal welfare outcomes, which people care about, and is potentially an important part of the social license and market opportunities story. Yeah, so I guess, yes, in summary, again, and some caveats to the analysis. It's real data from cattle enterprises in WA. And at the time, we've assumed that cattle can access all of these markets at the time of sale, which may or may not be the case, depending on weights or breeds or other things. But that, economic results are only one part of decision making. And we haven't included some other things, and possibly something like price risk would be probably quite important to include in that. Maybe like taking on a price position at the start of backgrounding or feedlotting, which may be different at the end. So we did do some sensitivity analysis, looking at, say, 20% changes in the various key parameters in the model, such as prices, but we didn't find that it didn't really change the findings. But perhaps given the fluctuation in prices over the last 6 months, 20% change might not be high enough. So we need to revisit that. Thanks very much. Yeah, just wanted to thank the producers and all the industry experts that helped us understand the north-south supply chains. That also helped us really in collecting the data and also in validating the results. So if you have any other questions or information, or if you'd like any more information on our other pastoral cattle projects, then please contact me on the email. Thanks very much.